Hi, this is Chris Young, and welcome to Good News on Tap for the fourth Sunday of Lent. There are two options for today's Gospel this week, a long version and a short version. So if you didn't hear the long one at church, I encourage you to go back and read the full version, because it's a really interesting story with lots of content in it. It's a story about a man who was born blind, who was cured by Jesus. And the question everyone was asking him is, who was it that sinned? Was it him or his parents? Now, having spent my entire life with a disability that's very visible, I get lots of questions about what caused my disability. Fortunately, no one is bold enough these days to say to me, "Are you in a wheelchair because your parents sinned, or was it something that you did?" We don't do that these days, but in biblical times, the natural assumption was that if there was something wrong with you, it must be because either you or perhaps your parents had committed some horrible sin. Jesus explains it had nothing to do with sin. The man was born blind in order to show the works of God. So Jesus cures the man and gives glory to God, and you'd think that would be the end of the story. But after the man's cured, he starts getting a third degree from everyone he runs into. They're saying stuff like, "Hey, aren't you that guy that used to sit and beg and act like you were blind?" It was like they were catching an insurance fraud, when you see the guy who's getting workers' disability and then he's out playing basketball or something. They want to know, how did you get cured? Well, eventually they drag him off to see the Pharisees, who give him a bunch of questions as well. Now, were the Pharisees mad that Jesus cured the guy? No. They were mad because he did it on the Sabbath. It's supposed to be a day of rest. You can't do any work on the Sabbath. They were so fanatical about the rules that you weren't allowed to work on the Sabbath that they wouldn't even let you do good works, like curing a man of lifelong blindness. Then they dragged his parents into the situation. Now, my mother used to really like this passage, because when they questioned the parents said, "Hey, go ask our son, don't ask us. He's of age." Of all the issues I've had to deal with my disability, I think the one that bothered my mom the most was that people would ask her questions about me when I was just sitting there. They were afraid to ask me anything, and they would talk to her like I didn't even exist. Sometimes she'd say the same thing to the people in the gospel. "Hey, if you want to know, ask him. He's sitting right here, don't ask me." Anyway, unlike my mom, who was just like to mess with people, these parents were afraid to say anything about what had happened to their son because they didn't want to be associated with a cure from this controversial guy, Jesus. So they just pleaded ignorant about the whole deal. So everyone in this gospel is coming to snap judgments about who is or isn't a sinner. Is it the parents? Is it the blind man? Is Jesus a sinner? There had to be some sin in here somewhere. Finally, at the end of the story, Jesus accuses the Pharisees of being spiritually blind. They're not blind in the physical sense, but instead they're blind to their own sinfulness. Their sin of being judgmental about everyone and everything. In the Old Testament reading, we have a similar situation about judging people by their appearance. Jesse was supposed to have one of his sons anointed as the king. And so one by one he brought them to Samuel. And all the older sons appeared to be more kingly. It turned out it was the youngest son, the simple little shepherd boy named David, who was the one who was going to be anointed as the king, despite the fact that he didn't seem to be a big, powerful warrior. It's easy to simply say, "Oh, don't judge a book by its cover." And we do, but we still do it all the time. We have a hard time putting that proverb into practice, especially when it comes to looking down at people or wondering if they're sinners or not. Sometimes we even judge a book by its opening chapters. We really don't understand what it's all about until you get to the end. Jesus started out his life, and for most of his life, he was a nobody just like David. You didn't expect him to be some powerful person. He was radical in his approach to things, and people assumed he had to be a sinner because he sure was different. But they weren't seeing what was right in front of them. The man was curing people. He was preaching love, not hate. And he was preaching forgiveness and not judgmentalness. They thought they understood what the story of Jesus was all about. But it wasn't the end of the story. And that's Good News on Tap for the fourth Sunday of Lent.